there's a whole thing called bottleneck theory, sometimes called the theory of constraints.
Right.
Which is that if you're intervening in any system, there is a point in the system. If you imagine the flow of water, okay?
Yeah.
If you want to increase the flow of water through a system, the place to intervene is the narrowest point, which is where the flow of water is ultimately being constrained. Everything you do somewhere else won't really have much effect because
until you open that part
until
up.
you open up
Okay,
that constraint. Okay, and so the idea is there's a guy called Eli Goldratt who wrote a book called The Goal, which is all about the theory of constraints. The Goal, Goal.
Yeah.
It's all about the theory of constraints. And the idea is, I think it's highly intelligent because I think it's quite applicable to marketing. That actually, if you're not selling as much shit as you think, okay. The question to ask is, what is the constraint? And it could be distribution, or it could be mental distribution, which is nobody's heard of you. So even though you're everywhere, nobody knows who you are or what you do.
Yeah.
And so...
yeah, that's interesting. Who is it? It's physical availability and mental availability.
That's a Byron Sharp thing, yeah.
Yeah, that was it, yeah.
So Coke is very, very mentally available in the sense that if you're sitting at any... Okay, so sitting here, or sitting in a cafe, or sitting in a shit cafe, or sitting in a Michelin 3-star restaurant, okay, you know that if you ask for Coke, they basically have to bring you one, otherwise they've got to explain why they don't stock Coke. Yeah. Now, that doesn't really apply to Dr. Pepper. If you're sitting in a Michelin 3-star restaurant, you said, can I have a Dr. Pepper Cherry Zero? Then they would say, I'm afraid we don't have that, and you'd feel like a twat for asking. Whereas if they don't have Diet Coke, they feel like a twat for not having it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does that apply to like ketchup and mayonnaise?
That's an interesting one because you could be a snobby restaurant and refuse to serve mayonnaise. You probably have to serve. That's a very interesting one. So, what are the That's a great question. What are the condiments? Now, mustard, I would argue, you have to have. If you're a steak restaurant, okay, you have to have mustard. You probably have to have mayonnaise, ketchup. Now, brown sauce and ketchup are interesting because, to be honest, a lot of people like them. And I would argue if you're serving breakfast and you don't offer brown sauce or ketchup, if you're serving bacon, you're being a bit of an arse. And actually, it's strange how you do have to ask, don't you? You would think, wouldn't you, that when you ordered a full English breakfast, there'd be a little pot of, at least on the table, there'd be a little pot of mayonnaise, or a little pot of, not mayonnaise, little pot of ketchup, little pot of HP sauce. Because I would argue that actually, obviously HP sauce isn't a given in, say, the US, but in the UK it would be for certain meals. And then it's interesting, in the US, I was in Texas, and I met the guy who's the chairman of the Texas Department of Transportation. Met him for breakfast. First thing he does when he sits down and his food arrives is, okay, can I have a bottle of Tabasco? And if you're in the American Southwest, chili or some sort of hot sauce is basically a mandatory. Whereas in New York, you probably get Tabasco in New York, but in Texas, you wouldn't consider not having some sort of chili-based condiment. Yeah. The reason we're doing the Bottleneck podcast is because I think the problem we've had in business, in government, in politics, is not that the toolkits are wrong, because all toolkits are wrong. Economics is wrong. All models are wrong. Some of them are useful. A guy called George Box said that. It's that we have this kind of, I would argue we have this kind of Abilene effect, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, where if everybody uses the same model to solve problems, it's all very convenient for them administratively because they're all on the same page. But ultimately, you get a complete deficiency in terms of imagination. You're not allowed to use intuition anymore. You're not allowed to use creativity anymore. Everything is considered successful to the extent that it conforms to the model you're using. And I think we need far more models. We just need to accept. Just as a good cop, okay, would say, yes, we'll swab for DNA, we'll look for fingerprints, we'll make door-to-door inquiries, okay? A good cop in the search for an insight or a breakthrough will deploy tons of different and complementary methodologies,
Yeah.
You'll go and talk to your You go and talk to a couple of informants
Yeah.
who may have heard in the street who is responsible for the Berners Street bank raid. You employ everything you can in pursuit of an insight. What you don't do, you're not allowed as a cop to become like a DNA fundamentalist. Now, that's not to say that DNA is unimportant or far from useful. It's incredibly useful, but you wouldn't make it your only mechanism for problem solving. And what we've done is we've had either lawyers or economists who are overwhelmingly given the responsibility, or finance in an organization, who are overwhelmingly given the responsibility to sanction or prevent areas of human activity, and it's simply too narrow a model to cover the complexity of modern life. And so where we get to bottleneck theory, the theory of constraints, Eli Goldratt, the goal, he was a physicist who actually became effectively a kind of business consultant and business guru, but his background was in physics. And his argument is that in many complex systems, what you've got to do is look for the bottleneck, look for the point at which the entire system is being constrained by this one variable far more than it's constrained by anything else. And then that's the place at which you intervene.
How do you find the bottleneck?
Well, interestingly, it could be, it could be a entirely logistical bottleneck, okay? Yeah. You don't have enough distribution, It could be a psychological one, which is not enough people are aware of your existence.
Yeah.
And you might argue, if you look at online food, the current, and by the way, bottlenecks will move, because as you solve one bottleneck, another bottleneck tends to be created somewhere else.
Yep.
So the way to think about it analogously is if you have a traffic jam caused by, let's say, a road that narrows from 2 lanes into 1, okay? Your natural instinct might be to widen that road. But if 500 yards down the road, there's a really badly phased set of traffic lights, what you might be doing is simply moving the traffic jam from one place to another.
Yeah.
And actually, until you've hacked the traffic lights, which is a cheap operation, it may be that when you hack the traffic lights, the other problem disappears. Okay? But until you've actually done the cheap bottleneck intervention, there's no point in having debates about what you do elsewhere, because however good you are upstream, you're still constrained by this one particular area of constraint, which I think explains why a lot of marketing activity and a lot of business activity is kind of fat-tailed. 20% of what you do makes 80% of the difference.
Espressos is sponsored by supply chain software gurus Unleashed. It talks to your e-com and accounting software. It's helped islands cut admin time in half, get granular clarity on your margins, know where your stock is, don't miss availability. Brands like Candy Kittens, Tiny Rebel and Trip all use Unleashed, and so should you.